Wonderful. It's lovely to see everybody here. And we will be back in our usual room next week. Sorry if it's not too warm, just you have to keep your jackets on. We're still working on this heating. I believe that the next week to 10 days will make a massive difference. I said to you, I keep saying 2 weeks. I've been saying 2 weeks for about 10 weeks now. So I do think this is the final 2 weeks, I've been told. Anyways, it's lovely to see you all and to start this series on Joseph. And last week, I don't know if some of you weren't here, you can actually catch up with the introduction one. We'll show you how you can catch up with that. But if you go on, you can get the first one to just give you a background. Because we spent some time trying to set the scene to show what actually happened with Joseph and the type of family he came from. So I'll just quickly summarize one or two things. Joseph had come from a very, very dysfunctional family. And from a family that were living in quite a godless area of the land. He had gone to, his dad had gone to find his mum, and all sorts of things happened. I'm not going to go into the details, but it was a very dysfunctional family where his dad had taken on the culture of the place he was in, and actually had wanted to marry one girl, but ended up being married to Leah. So we find Joseph, he has one mum, 3 stepmoms, 12 brothers and 1 sister that we know of. And they're living in this very dysfunctional family. We also looked last week at God uses ordinary lives. God uses the ordinary things, and he breathes his supernatural breath onto them. So all of us are ordinary. Nobody's special. But in God's eyes, we're very special. And when we submit to him, he breathes into us, and we can do great things for God. And the second thing from last week was God's word never fails. So whatever he's spoken, it will come true, and it will come to fruition. And so every one of us has a unique calling, a unique yoke. When we're yoked to Jesus, we have a unique yoke to walk with and learn. So there's no point thinking, I want that yoke, or I want to be like that. I remember many years ago thinking, if I could just wear a black jacket to my knees and dye my hair blonde, I could actually sing like Darlene Check. I really felt, I looked at her and I thought, yeah, I could say, if I just looked like her, I could do it. But there's a unique gifting and calling in her life that's not on my life. But many of us, that's a funny illustration, but many of us do that in life. We look at someone else, especially girls, we compare, we think, if I could have looked like that, if I could have been taller, if I could have been in a different family, I could have done exactly what they do. But no, there's a unique calling on all of us. So Joseph had come from this very, very dysfunctional family. Favoritism was really strong in this family. He was loved the most by his father. His father had a favorite wife, so he really didn't love Leah very much. He certainly didn't love the two women, the two maidservants, his concubines. He really didn't love them. He just used them, really. The only person he really loved was one. So his dad has favorites. He was also his mom's favorite. And so there's favoritism in the family. There's favoritism that has been in generations. There's all sorts of things been going on. And so he's also, favoritism is there. And then he's now about to go and meet this Esau, this Uncle Esau that he's heard about. So there's fear there as well. So Joseph is in this family where he's heard these stories. He's fearful. There's favoritism. He knows that the DNA of his family is manipulation, lies, second-guessing, trying to figure things out, trying to fix the problems. He's heard about his great-granddad, Abraham, that tried to fix the issue and got Hagar pregnant. He's heard about the lies that were told about, well, she's not my wife, she's my sister. He's seen all of these different things. So he's grown up in this. He's got all of this. So this is the type of person he is. And then this young boy, there's, he's not that much younger than all of his brothers. We worked out last week that actually these 11 boys were born within 6.5 years. So actually it's like, between my youngest grandchild and Ellis, we have 12 children that were born in that years. And so they had 12 children born in those 6.5 years, 11 boys and Dinah. And, Benjamin was born a little bit later. So it's like that. So we found that out, that he's not much younger. The image is always Joseph is this young boy, and these are all these older people, but they're all around the same age. The next one, Asher, was probably just a few months different, and they're all growing up together. This is a trauma that Joseph has lived through. Joseph has lived through that suddenly they leave in the middle of the night, they're going to escape and go back home. He's heard about this scary uncle. Laban comes chasing after them and wants to kill Joseph, but doesn't lay a hand on them because God spoke to him and said, no, he's a chosen one, don't do anything. He's living in fear. He's watching his mom worship idols and telling lies about the idols she's stolen. He actually, in the journey of going back home to meet the family, his mom dies giving birth to his baby brother. So he loses his mom. He's got this baby brother that is now having to be raised by his aunt. He watches his dad grieve very bitterly. So his dad is inconsolable. He's raised by an aunt, and he's got this family DNA. So Joseph does not have a lot going for him. He's got a lot stacked against him. But he's 17 years old, and when we find him in the story. So we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 37. And between the time they arrive back, when he's about 6 or 7, 10 years have now passed. In those 10 years, his brothers have gone and committed murder and killed a whole bunch of people in Shechem. His oldest brother, Reuben, has slept with one of his dad's concubines, one of the stepmoms. There's incest in the family. There's so many things going wrong. But Joseph is growing up, and Joseph is learning of God. So the one thing we're going to learn, there's 3 things we're going to speak about. Joseph has a different spirit within him. I've described what's happened in his family, but Joseph has a different spirit. So I'm going to read these few verses. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of the other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. But the interesting thing is, they were all born to him in his old age, okay? There's nothing special. But he was the favored son of the favored wife. And he bought his brother, he made him a special coat. When the brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him, and they could not speak a kind word against him. So in spite of this dysfunctional family and this hatred, and Joseph hasn't asked to be the favored son. Joseph has not asked to be the favorite. He's just a kid that actually wants to do good. You've maybe had some children. Some of you have children, some of you don't have children, but you've seen some kids that are just naturally kind of good. And there's others that just love to say no. And they're just born that way. We all have to. I was one of those kids that loved to say no, loved to challenge things, loved to push boundaries. You would have never guessed. But anyways, I had one of my children loved to. I remember she said to me one day, she goes, "Mommy, I just want to be easy." And I, who says that? She just wanted to be easy. If I said, "You can't go beyond here," she would just step back. She would not want to go there. She just was an easy child. It was so easy. I never had to raise my voice. It was very easy. But none of the rest, and a lot of them weren't like that. I wasn't like that as a child, okay? So Joseph had a different spirit. There was something different in him that stirred and yearned for the things of his father and his grandfather and his great-grandfather. I believe the Lord was doing something in him. When Jacob got back, Jacob got his family, said, right, we're going to build an altar here. And, Jacob got his whole family together, and he said, right, we're going to go to Bethel. And he said, hey, listen, your great-grandfather Abraham, this is where God promised that he would give him descendants. And he said, and when I was fleeing from Uncle Esau, I came here and I fell asleep here, and the Lord showed me a ladder, and he spoke to them and he said, we're going to dedicate things, we're going to do things differently. And then he had a moment where he wrestled with the Lord. So Joseph has watched all these he's watched his dad's spiritual journey. His dad's been cold spiritually, but his dad is now warmed up. His dad walks with a limp because he's had an encounter with God. He's got a new name and a new destiny. And Joseph is watching this, and something in him is yearning to be like the Lord. There's something spiritual going on in him. So it's not like he was this spoiled little brat that wanted to bring a bad report. I believe his father said, hey, listen, could you go and find out what's happening? How are things going? And he came back and he was honest. He was truthful. Because, when you are a Christ follower, truth will come out. Because the truth sets you free. Your life is not a life of deception and lies. Your life is one of truth-telling. So Jacob knows that his son will tell the truth, that his son wants to tell the truth. And so he will say what happened, and he gets the truth. He's not going to ask the brothers. They are great at lying and telling lies. He can't ask them. He'll say, how did things go? And they're like, oh, everything's great. Went to Shechem. We had a great time. He's not going to tell. They're not going to say we murdered all these people. He found these things out later on. But he could trust Joseph. So in spite of his dysfunctional family, he has a sweeter spirit. Joseph has a moral conscience, a conscience. Now, if you look at the word conscience in the diary, it says your conscience is when you believe that something is right, even though it might be unpopular and difficult and dangerous, but something in you think, I've got a moral compass here. I want to do the right thing, even though it's not cool, even though it's not the right in other people's eyes. I want to be upright. And so that's what Joseph was like. He observed the family deception on one hand, and then he just thought, no, I want to do things differently. He observed his mom worshiping idols. And then, when Jacob said, hey, when Jacob turned around and said, to Laban, if you find anyone with idols, you kill them. And, the story in the Bible is, Rachel was sitting on her camel and says, oh, please don't move me. I'm on my period. I can't get off. She was hiding the camels there. She was hiding the idols underneath the camels. So Laban didn't move her. But it was discovered later on, because who was able to tell that story? That story came out. Because, the truth does come out. And so he's watched that. And then when his mom dies in labor, I wonder if he remembered the words of his father. Oh, my mom's died. Did she die because there's a just God and she told lies and there's a jealous God that wants my attention? I don't know. I have no idea. But he has observed all these things and he has thought to himself, I want to live differently. He watched his dad have a God encounter and walk with a limp, and he also wants that for his life. He's watched all these different encounters and thought, no, I want to have something different. Favoritism in a family always breeds hatred and jealousy. Look at Cain and Abel, the very first story in the Bible, two brothers. The first sin in the Bible was not murder. The first sin was jealousy. And jealousy and hatred lead to murder. Think of Saul and David. Saul hated David because he was jealous that he was more popular. Think of Mary and Martha vying for attention, comparing and contrasting. It never bodes well. So be aware when you find that thing rising within you, that's not the right spirit. Remember, come back to the right spirit that the Lord has for you. Jealousy is tied up. The 10 Commandments that Moses gave the Israelites, jealousy is highly important there. Adultery, that's when you're jealous of someone else's spouse. Think of it. Stealing, you're jealous. They've got something you want. Killing, that's usually often, we've spoken about that, jealousy. Serving other gods, God says, I'm a jealous God. I want your love. Don't go serving them. He's jealous for our love. And we need to be jealous we don't need to be jealous because he loves us unconditionally, but he is jealous for our heart. And we must remember that. So, as well as having a soft heart for the things of God, the second thing is Joseph has been given a unique spiritual gifting within. Each of you have a spiritual gifting. Each of you have something that's unique. We've been learning this, we've been looking at this thing about these yokes that, take upon my yoke, because learn of me and walk with me. And it speaks about that. And we've been looking at that. That's going to be our life verse, looking ahead in Kings. And so each of us have a yoke that's made specifically for you, specifically for me. We've been given gifts within our hands that's specifically for us. I don't know what your gifting is. Your gifting could be a wooden spoon. Maybe you just love to cook meals. Do you know how wonderful that is, to bless and cook someone a meal? That is as important as standing on a platform preaching a sermon. In God's eyes, each gift is unique and each gift is blessing. Never underestimate the gift God has given you. Maybe your gift is, I remember speaking to someone, they said, I'm not very good. I'm not great at organizing. I just love to talk to people. Fantastic. We need people to talk to each other, to talk and be interested. We need encouragers in the church. We need all sorts of people. When everybody works in their sweet spot of the gift God has given you, then you'll do well. Joseph did not ask for this gift. I believe because of the softness of his heart, the Lord gave him this gift of telling dreams. He's a truthful person. He's honest. He's reliable. He's trustworthy. And the Lord's like, okay, I can trust you with this. And, he has this personal relationship with the Lord. And, in Genesis 37, it speaks about the dreams. The first dream he has, it's about, the sheaves of corn and all that kind of stuff bowing down, and his sheaf stands up tall. And he thinks, what is that about? That's just crazy. And he said to his brothers, you'll never believe I had a crazy dream last night. Let me tell you my dream. And they don't like him anyways. And they listen to this dream, and it looks like you're above us, you're stronger than us. And Joseph doesn't have the interpretation of the dream. The Lord has only given him the dream, but he hasn't got the interpretation. So he shares his dream. They hate him all the more. They don't like him. Then he has another dream. The next dream, it's like, all the 11 stars and the sun and the moon, which represents his mom and dad, or his dad and Leah's obviously raised him, bowing down. And it says in the Bible these wonderful words. It says, Joseph, when his dad then took him aside and said, for goodness sakes, don't tell your brothers. What are you saying this for? Are you expecting me? But there's this wonderful word. His brothers were jealous of him. They hated him even more. But his father kept the matter in mind. It reminds me of Mary, when the Lord spoke to Mary and she hid them in her heart and thought, what's that dream about? What's that visitation I've had? What's the Lord doing with this? I'm not going to go broadcasting. I'm not going to go on social media. I'm going to keep it, and I'm going to pray over it, and I'm going to see what the Lord has to say. And sometimes the Lord has words for you, and the Lord has different things for you. Keep them hidden, and at the right time, he'll bring things out. And so this is what Joseph is like. So he's got these dreams, and it said that they hated him more. In fact, I went through the whole chapter. 8 times they hate him, they can't stand him, they want to kill him, there's jealousy, there's all these words that they can't stand him, and 8 times it's mentioned. There's a lot of controversy. People are like, why did Joseph tell their dreams? Why in the world? Was he immature? Was he arrogant? Was he this? Was he that? I believe the Holy Spirit told him to tell the dreams. Because if he hadn't declared those dreams then, 22 years later, when he's suddenly in Egypt and he's looking at his brothers, it says he remembered his dream. And the brothers also remembered the dreams. When they finally realized who he is, they remember the dreams. So it seemed unwise. It seemed arrogant. It seemed a little bit foolish. But he was prompted to say it. And his father kept these things in his mind. So I believe that he was doing the right thing. These brothers were dream killers. Be careful who you share your dream and your heart with. It says to guard your heart. Be careful who you share it with, because you might be sharing it with dream killers and people that want to destroy your hope. Surround yourself with people who will not want to kill your dreams, who will encourage you and pray alongside with you for things. You know, they mocked him, they hated him. So many times they hated him, they couldn't stand him, and they wanted to kill him. In fact, when it speaks about it, when he comes later on, which I'll just read in a little bit, when they speak about different things, it says, oh, here comes a dreamer. Let's kill him, then we'll see what happens to his dreams. They weren't just wanting to kill him, they were wanting to kill his dreams. But you know what we learned last week was, when God speaks something, God's word will come true. So even though they got rid of the problem, even though they thought they'd solved the issue, the dream was going to come true 22 years later. Okay? So be very careful. They hated the robe his father gave him. That robe, it's significant because the robe the father gave him was a long robe and it had long sleeves. And in those days, if you had a long robe, that meant that you were quite important. And if you had long sleeves, that meant you weren't to work. Because if you were going to graft in the fields, you needed your sleeves rolled up, you wanted to work. But if you're wearing this ornate robe, you can't run in the fields, you can't get mucky. So this robe represented that he was superior to them. He didn't ask for the robe, it was given to him. And so the robe was on him, and it showed something. When he would wear it, they just hated him. And he probably wore it because his dad told him to wear it. His dad didn't want him to go, you just stay at home, you stay here. I believe, nothing is wasted. But for those years he was there, for those 8 years he was with his father, and he was with his grandfather, Isaac, I believe he sat there saying, tell me the stories. Tell me what it was like. Granddad Isaac, when you were lying there and great-granddad was going to kill you, what were you thinking? Tell me about the dream. Tell me about what great-granddad Abraham, what was that thing about? He's going to take the descendants away for 400 years. What was that about? I believe he was growing, and inside there was this great, large spiritual giant growing the whole time. He wasn't in the field working with his brothers because he wasn't allowed to work there. His father wanted him there, but I believe he was growing, and nothing is wasted. But this robe represented, every time they saw the robe, it represented favoritism. It represented injustice. It represented a lazy brother that didn't work, and he was enjoying the spoils of their work. They were out grafting hard. He was at home enjoying the food and the spoils, and they hated him all the more. All of us wear colored robes. All of us wear robes of righteousness, right? We have these robes of righteousness that the Lord places over us. And we walk in favor, and we walk in God's favor. Be careful, because there's an enemy out there that wants to disrobe you, that wants to take that robe off you, that wants to tell you that you're not worthy of it, that how dare you wear that robe, you have no right to wear that robe. I'm talking just metaphorically here, that you have no right to wear that robe, that you're just, and he wants to remind you of the sins in your life that God has cloaked. He says he cloaks us with the robe of righteousness. So when he sees us, he just sees the cloak. But the devil wants to disrobe you and remind you of your shame and your sin and your past. So remember that thing. And I listened to a wonderful sermon, actually, by Stephen Furtick, from Elevation Church. And he said a wonderful thing. He said, nowadays you hear people speaking about, follow your dreams, whatever's in your heart, follow your dreams. Joseph did not follow his dreams followed him. So these were spiritual dreams. He did not make this up. These were dreams. He didn't think, this dream, right, let me go and sign up to night classes and learn how to become a leader, learn how to become this. No, he had no choice in the matter. He was taken away, but his dreams followed him. The calling on his life followed him. And so if you felt discouraged, you thought, things aren't working out, remember, whatever he's called or spoken over you, they will be fulfilled. They will follow you. Okay? So we found that. So the third thing is, as well as all of these different things that are on him, he's unique. He's got a different spirit within him. There's a different gifting within him. The third thing is, David's valley experience has been ordained by God Almighty. So you think all of this has happened, but there's a valley coming. So don't think that he didn't go through a valley. He went through a large valley. And so it goes on. He says to, Jacob says, now, Joseph, your brothers have gone off to Shechem. Could you just go and see that they're okay? Because he knows what happened at Shechem. This has already happened. The murder's happened. He's a bit anxious because could you go and find them? So Joseph goes on, obedient as ever, goes on to find his brothers. He asks the people, no, they're not here. They've gone on to Dothan. So he goes on there and he goes to find them. He goes to find out how they're getting on, to bring back a report, a truthful report to his father. Joseph never sees his dad again for many, many years, 22 years before he sees him again. Joseph, as he's approaching, he hears their hatred. He feels the evil. You know, it's like he's walking into the lion's den. It's like he's walking out to battle with Goliath. And these are the words in Genesis. They saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they had plotted to kill him. So he hasn't even opened his mouth. But before they reached him, they wanted to kill him. They said, here comes that dreamer. Come now, let's kill him. Let's throw him into one of these pits here, and let's say that a ferocious animal has devoured him. Then we'll see what happens to his dreams. So they're not just going to get rid of him. They've not just decided how they're going to kill him. They've already planned the next plot of how we're going to deceive our father and then we're going to get rid of him. But one of the things that it struck me, we'll see what comes of his dreams. Those dreams really bothered them. Those dreams really bugged them. They were so indignant and angry with those dreams. Joseph must have gone through, he's now only 17. He's a teenager. He must have gone through a roller coaster of emotions. There must have been awful things happened. Because, I'll just get these verses up here. When, I was reading this later on. And later on, in chapter 43 or something, it speaks about when they see Joseph. This is the words that the brothers say. This is now 22 years later. They started talking amongst themselves. And the reason this is recorded, Joseph, he understands what they're saying. Now we're paying for what we did to our brother. We saw how terrified he was when he begged us for mercy. We wouldn't listen to him then, and now we're the ones in trouble. Another version said, we saw his anguish when he pleaded for his life. When I read this story, I've often thought this story was like, okay, bad boy, you come here, and they put him in there. I think they punched him. I think they beat him up. I think they were cruel to him. They were sick of him. I listened to one commentator said he might have had black eyes. You don't know what state he was in when he went in there. I'd never thought of the abuse he must have received. And he was put in there. And he must have begged them a little, guys, I'm so sorry. I'll never speak about my dreams again. I am so sorry. Please rescue me. Please, Dad will be so upset. And it says that as he's there crying, he's in a dry pit, as he's there in this emotional state, the brothers are up there having a feast. They're eating the spoils. They're discussing what they're going to do. And then they decide, well, let's make money from him. There's some Ishmaelites. And these Ishmaelites, are going and they sell him. The anguish of being the favorite son that didn't do very much work to suddenly being a slave. I mean, the contrast is so huge. But those brothers were so heartless. They hated him so much that a young boy, a young teenager, crying and begging him for mercy, begging for his life, pleading with them, made absolutely no difference to them. They had it in their hearts. Years later, I believe for 22 years they lived with that guilt. I believe they were tortured themselves. You can't go through an experience of hurting someone or doing something so bad that you're not tortured yourself, in those quiet moments. So Joseph has heard them, and he's sitting this in a dry well. It speaks about dry well. So that means that there's no water, there's nothing in there. He has no provisions while they are having a feast. He is totally powerless. He's now sold as a slave. He must have said please. We know that he said please and all that, but can you imagine this favored son that had a robe, he's now been disrobed, and they sell him. And they're thinking, well, that's great. We've got rid of him, and now we've got rid of the robe because we're going to ruin the robe, and we've got rid of the dreams. They think they have done wonderful things, but God's word will take place. There's a lovely bit in the Bible where it says, but God was with Joseph when he went down to Egypt. And when I used to tell those stories to children, I used to say to the children, this happened, and I would say, but God was with him. He never left him. He was with him in every journey. So whatever valley you go in, he is with you. In fact, he's more with you in a valley. When you go through difficult times, you are more aware of his presence than you are in the mountaintops, because you're so happy. You become distracted by the world around you that you actually forget to have your quiet time. You forget all the different things. But when you're in your valley, boy, every verse means something. The worship songs take on a new meaning. Everything happens. This morning in Women of Valor, we played that song, The Battle Belongs to You, And I wrote some of the words down. If you are for me, then who can be against me? I believe Joseph would have sung this song. When all I see is ashes, when all I see is nothing, you see beauty, the Lord. So when I fight, I'm going to fight on my knees. Every fear I lay at your feet. You shine in the shadows. Nothing can stand the power of our Lord. So I believe, you think of so many worship songs that have ministered to you in your valley. And I believe Joseph would be like, yep, I've sung those songs. I know what it's like. And it's just going to be so interesting. But, he wasn't just physically abused, but I think emotionally and everything. But the one thing they couldn't take was his spirit. And that's what, the Satan will try to do all sorts of things. But don't ever let him guard your heart. Don't let him take your spirit. Don't let him whisper into your ear. Don't let him tell you things that you're not. You are who he says you are, And so he goes down there and, they go back. This is a 17-year-old in a new land. There is no grandfather or dad to guide him anymore. There is a new language to learn. It's a godless culture full of idols and idolatry. He has lost all his rights as a free person. He is 17 years old. And I was thinking, imagine one of our young people in youth. Imagine getting someone from a very dysfunctional family where they're really not liked, and that person is removed, taken away from their family, taken away from Callum and the youth leaders that have led and guided them, taken away from the church that's provided a youth group, taken away from United events and all these different things. And you imagine that person would go, let's say, down to Birmingham or down to Glasgow, and you pop that person there. Would you give up much hope for that person going on with God? You'd think, no, they're going to be so isolated. They're going to be so alone. I don't hold up much hope for them. They haven't even come from a proper family anyways. They'll forget about all this. They'll get angry. They'll get bitter. But Joseph has a different spirit. He's had an encounter with God, and he goes to a place where there is nothing, and he grows stronger because God is with him. There is no church to go to. There is no friends. There is no United. There is nothing going on, but there is the Holy Spirit, but there is God. And so I just find that story is quite amazing. He grows deeper in his faith. He grows stronger, because when he comes out of this, and we're going to find out in the next few weeks, when he comes out of this, he has no bitterness. He has grown in mercy. He's grown in forgiveness. He's grown in love. He's grown in compassion. He has become more like Christ than anything else. And another thing I found interesting was, the dreams he had these dreams, but he had no interpretation. But that gifting God had given him has matured. And you look at the dreams God has given him since then. He doesn't just give him the dream, he also gives him the interpretation. So he has matured in his giftings. He has matured as a man, and he comes out stronger. He comes out not thinking, oh, right, I've got all this money. I always wondered, why did Joseph never decide, when he had all this power, to have a little road trip back to see his dad? Why did he never do that? Because he had learned, those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. He's learned to wait. He's learned so much. Nothing in life is wasted. God ordained your valleys to improve you or to prove us. Everything in his 17 years before he went has not been wasted. Learning to listen to God, learning to see what's like in a godless culture. looking at jealousy, looking at adultery, looking at all those things that he observed in his family, he knew that God was able to use him and protect him. You know, later on, one of his relatives called King David would write in Psalm 105. Then he sent someone, this is David writing Psalm 105. Then, he's speaking about the children of Israel. Then God sent someone to Egypt ahead of them. Joseph was sold as a slave. They bruised his feet with fetters. They placed his neck in an iron collar. We always forget what it must have been. He was a slave. He must have had that collar on and been dragged and paraded, probably naked in front of everybody. The humiliation for a 17-year-old was awful. And then it says here, until the time came to fulfill his dreams, the Lord tested Joseph's character. And another version, the Amplified Version, says, until the time that the word of prophecy regarding his brothers came true, the word of the Lord tested and refined Joseph. So the pit, Potiphar's house, the prison, all the stuff was refining him and bringing him in, maturing him up. You know, later on, Isaiah would say in verse 40, in chapter 43, verse 18 and 19, and I believe this would be Joseph's testimony if he's here today. Forget the former things. Don't dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Don't you perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness, streams in the wasteland. And so I believe just this chapter 37 has so much. I mean, there's just so many different things to this chapter that you could learn. But, you know, go home and read it for yourself. See what the Lord speaks to you. But I've got some questions up here to just talk on the table and to see if there's anything that stirs. And I've tried to make them, you know, I don't want to be pointed, but just use them as a point of discussion. See if you can find things. But, you know, he ordains your valleys. He brings you, you know, isolation is not the end. It's a time of learning. It's how you view things. Guard your heart. Don't let the devil disrobe you. And don't let anyone talk you out of the dreams that God has given you. Okay? So we'll just talk through these here until the end. Right. Okay. Thanks.